edges. And a couple of ways that these large primaries were used is that they say the shaman, the Indian doctors would take these large primaries and that they would shove them down the throats of their patients and then pull them back out again. In the process of pulling them out, they would remove the sickness from the patients. Now, to really appreciate that, you have to look at just how large one of these feathers are. Now, I maintain that back then it paid off to stay healthy because the consequence would be probably worse than the illness. Anyway, this is a primary that you see. You'll see in the slide, this is a secondary, and I'll just pass these around so you guys can get an idea of how just kind of cool they really are. I mean, that primary is as long as most bird wings are on both sides. They would also wave these feathers over their patients too in various healing exercises. They would also use condor bones in their healing ceremonies, sometimes as whistles, and in other times as sucking tubes. And one of the common healing practices utilizing large condor bones was to suck the poison and the illness from their patients. So they would take these bone tubes, place them up against their patients, and suck on them. And in the process of doing that, again, remove the illness from their patients. I think I'd rather have that treatment than the feather treatment myself. Okay. Condor ceremonies, rituals, and dances. This is a dance skirt made of condor secondary feathers, and the shorter of the two that's passing around is a secondary. That'll give you an idea of just the makeup of the skirt. It's probably the most common ceremonial dance regalia piece that was used by Native Americans. And they were often found today in bundles like this. And they were also used in ceremonies as bundles, as well as unfolded in skirts. In fact, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story that I drug out of the ethno record. In 1579, the now famous Sir Francis Drake was limping along the coast of California with a leaky ship, and he was searching for somewhere to land so he could fix that ship. He was hurt. When he looked up and he saw a group of Indians coming out to his boat in a canoe, and as they got closer, he could hear them making statements. I believe that was probably blessings. And then all of a sudden, when those Indians got close enough, they took a feather bundle, just like this, and we know they were condor feathers because of the description, and threw it up on the boat. Now, we also know from the record that Sir Francis Drake's sailors felt that they were being worshipped by these Indians, when in fact, what these Indians were doing was performing a mourning ceremony. So those Indians probably had an inclination of what was to come. They were performing a mourning exercise on Sir Francis Drake's boat. Anyway, I think it's very interesting that condors show up in that part of history. It's very, very interesting. Okay. This is a headdress. The leather you see down below would be strapped around the forehead, and of course these would be set up, and these are smaller body feathers. Anyway, condor's feathers were used for many ceremonies and quite a few different dances, in the form of skirts, capes, and headdresses. The Indians believed that these feathers possessed the power and spirit of the birds from which they came. And of course, condor feathers were the most supernaturally powerful feathers or objects in these Native American cultures. Unfortunately, there's very, very few examples of regalia utilizing California condor feathers for several reasons that I think that you might find interesting, so I'll go over them. First of all, most Native Americans, like the Chumash, believed that once a ceremonial chief or dancer died, that he was to take his feathers with him. And if he didn't do that, it was the responsibility of someone within the family to bury them or burn them or destroy them. And if they didn't do that, that someone in the family might fall sick and even die. Anyway, under no circumstances was another individual to inherit those feathers. So much of the regalia in a natural process was buried with the individuals that owned them. Okay, and so the other, another couple of reasons why. Here's a little known fact: the gold rush of 1849-50/50. If you mapped the areas where most of the mining occurred, it would overlap within the Condor's range, or very, very close to it. And what happened in the process is these miners would indenture and displace many of the individual tribes and village in order to work within their mining operations. And of course, they also introduced diseases that were exotic to these Native Americans that they had no immune systems to. So in essence, what happened throughout the range of the California condor is that Indians died at a higher rate. They were displaced from their villages, and therefore they weren't recreating regalia, and the regalia that did exist was lost. And so there was a so you take that on top of the fact that ceremonially they buried their feathers and regalia, and then on top of that, the near extinction of the California condor, because it became extinct in the wild for a short period of time, as you know. Well, anyway, that left Native Americans within the range of the California with no sort of feathers to create their condor rituals and dances and ceremonies. And so in essence, they pretty much died out. And there's very few, if any, of the original condor ceremonies, dances, being done today as a result. And it's really, really a shame. I think it's really interesting that you can look at the gold rush of 1849 as kind of the genesis of the near extinction of the California condor. But it's true. Not only were they impacted native cultures within that range, but they couldn't help shooting a condor just to shoot one to brag about it. And they all had guns, and they were all running around the southern Sierras panning for gold. But they did use condor feathers for one reason, and that was to store their gold dust. So they take one of the large primaries like I'm passing around, take off the feathers, cut the end of it off, and they would store their gold dust in it. And then with a leather tang, they would tie it, and they would tie it to their belts, and that's how they carried much of the gold dust. And it even had a value. Each one of those quills filled with gold dust was worth $1. Yeah, I know. So, condor regalia. If you want to see condor regalia, you have to go to Russia, because the early Russian fur traders collected and traded for regalia that utilized condor feathers. And of course, they took it back to Russia. And so if you go to some of the natural histories in Russia, history museums in Russia, you'll see examples of condor regalia. But you won't see it here. There may be one exception. Okay, some ceremonies. Here's a couple that are really, really interesting that involve California condors. This is the Talawa Indians and the Yurok Indians used condor feathers in combination with eagle feathers, both bald and golden, in order to create, and excuse me here, these large, it's hard to see right here, but on their head there's this very large feather that comes up. And so it's like not this long in reality. And that was an integral part of their regalia here when they performed the white deer dance, or the white albino deer dance. And it's a very, very spooky dance ceremony. There was where did they get all those albino deer? That's the grindhorn. But it was a renewal ceremony that was done every year where the Yokats and the Talawal would get together and they would do their white deer dance. And of course, they would give thanks for all the good things that happened that year. And of course, they would petition the powers to be for equally good luck and fortune in the future. And condor feathers were an integral part of that ceremony.